Well, Budget 2021 was a big one, with almost $18 billion being announced going into aged care. But that's spread over years, so you can't say that the problem's solved, but it's a big step forward. And one of the things that we're most pleased about at National Seniors is the announcement of 80,000 extra home care packages to go with the 30,000 released late last year. Now, we hope this will eliminate the home care wait list, and if that happens, that is a fantastic move. Also, there will be more hours of care given to people in aged care. Money's been made available for that, and also some changes to superannuation so that those people aged between 60 and 64 can downsize and put money into super. That scheme was announced a couple of years ago, but it's now been made available to that younger cohort. And also, the other one that's been a big change is that if you're between 67 and 74, there will no longer be a work test if you want to put contributions into super. So all of those changes are out there. They're all big wins, and we're going to go through the details of the budget and give you more as we understand it more. But for today, that's the news from National Seniors. I'm Ian Henschke, the Chief Advocate.
Hello everyone and welcome this morning at 11 o'clock this morning here in Sydney time. We are welcoming you to this special broadcast today where we're going to be drilling down on the federal government's response to aged care and the investment that has just been made. You just saw Ian then talk about it from a National Seniors Australia's perspective, but I just want to welcome everyone today. Now, before I kick it off, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, water and community. I pay my respects to them and to their cultures and to the elders, both past, present and emerging. Before we kick off today's session, I just want to make sure that you're all aware around certain things to be aware of within today's session. We want to make sure that you keep it very interactive. So the chat room, please make sure that you say hello. Tell us where you're tuning in from today as well. Now, if you have any issues with the stream, we always recommend refreshing your page. So just hit the refresh button. If you continuously have issues, try a different browser, whether it's Safari or Google Chrome. Or if you have really bad issues, then maybe even try a different device. Don't worry though, if you're not going to miss out on anything. Because we're recording this session, you'll be able to catch up with everything later on. So do not stress about that. A replay link will be sent to you after the session is completed. So I want to get straight into today's discussion. Hello, Margaret. Hello, Patricia. Hello, Janine. Hello, Craig. Can we please welcome in today's two other panelists today, Craig and Ian? Can you please pop in and say hello to everyone today? How are you both?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. I'm speaking to you today from Adelaide. So we've just had a big COVID outbreak possibly here, and we've got thousands of people queuing up for testing. But apart from that, we're all fit and well.
Well, we are thinking of everyone down in Melbourne and now Adelaide as well. So hopefully if you're tuning in from those areas, please say hello in the chat room. Craig, how are you today, mate?
All good up here. I'm dialing in from Sydney. Up on the Gold Coast yesterday, everyone at the airport was very nervous about what's going on. So good luck to everyone managing what's happening there. And a big welcome to everyone today. Pretty thrilled.
Now, yeah, we're very excited to be bringing this to you. It's from Care 360 and also National Seniors as well. Craig, can you just give everyone a little bit of rundown around who you are and what Care 360 does in the market?
Yeah, so very briefly, we set up Care 360, myself and the team set up Care 360 a few years ago when one of the founders, Noel Lord, was trying to find a home for his father and went through the experience with the government service and then went through a placement agent experience and tried to use some of the online search engines at the time and found no one was able to give him a clear, unbiased view that would actually compare the homes on a like-for-like basis. So we went about thinking, well, we need to fix that. How can we set up something where we don't take any money from any of the aged care homes or from the government? We can be completely unbiased from that point of view. And offer families a way to find the right care home for them, not what's right for the industry or right for government. And we've launched the service now and having a great time speaking to people hearing about a lot of the big challenges people are finding, and not just in finding the right home, but trying to navigate your way through all the fees, government fees, home fees, and so on that are there. So we're hopefully chipping away at ways to help people.
Very glad that we're holding this session too today. We held one previously, which was a real success around, how people should navigate getting into aged care, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Ian, you've been the face of National Seniors now. You're also leading many of the charges in communication out there around aged care. Can you give everyone a bit more of a rundown around who you are and also what National Seniors is all about before we kick off on today's discussion?
Well, look, I'm a 66-year-old man who used to work in the media for about a third of a century. So I go back to last century. If some of the people out there recognise me, it might be because I've worked on Landline, Four Corners, 7:30 Report. I write regularly for the local paper here in Adelaide, and about almost 5 years ago, I moved into this area of advocacy for National Seniors, and it was a great challenge. And you might remember 5 years ago, there was no talk of a Royal Commission. There was we'd had about 20 inquiries into aged care, and along the way, a lot's happened over those years. And I feel very proud to be part of an organisation that's been fighting for a better deal for older Australians, not just in aged care, but in retirement incomes as well, and a whole range of things, including trying to fix pension poverty. So our organisation tries to be as many things to as many older Australians as possible. In fact, we're doing work at the moment around COVID, working with culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And I would also just like to say that it's also Reconciliation Week this week, and I do appreciate the fact that you acknowledge country, and I do that from Adelaide, from the land of the Kaurna people today. So, look, we live in an extraordinary world at the moment where things are changing very rapidly, and we've got to deal with COVID and a whole range of other issues. But this morning, what I'd like people to do is to get some information, learn a bit about what we do as an organisation and what Care 360 does, and how we can basically work together to make things better. Because I think we are at a turning point in Australia where we've got millions of older Australians. Many of them are anxious about their future and their family's future and their friends' future. And we're going to try and provide a little bit of an opportunity this morning to share some of the things that we know with you. So to all the people that have joined us out there, and I believe that we've had more than 250 or something people register, I think it's really important that you do find out the information. One of the things, and I'll just finish with this, Peter Costello, the former Treasurer of the country, gave evidence to the Royal Commission saying he could not understand how to navigate the aged care system. Now, that is a damning indictment.
Wow.
And I'll tell you something just also to go with that. I had an old colleague of mine who'd worked in the media, who has a degree in accountancy, whose mother's just had some issues, and he's finding exactly the same thing. So it doesn't matter how many degrees you've got, where you come from, the system is troublesome, it's confusing, and it needs improving.
Ian, thank you so much for sharing that. You're totally right. For myself, my mum's reaching out at that age where we're sort of considering about what to do, and sometimes you don't even know where to start. I'm so glad that you've been the voice, and National Seniors have been there as well to be able to give the voice to aged care in general. And now that you've had a few weeks to be able to dissect what has happened with the Royal Commission, but now with the federal budget and the investment into aged care, where do you sit with it?
Well, it's only been, the way time passes, it's only been a couple of weeks, actually. It's only been 2 weeks since the federal budget. And we've also seen the recommendations of the Royal Commission, which came down on March the 1st. Now, I'll talk about the Royal Commission briefly, because I think it's important to remember that Royal Commission cost more than $100 million, right?
Wow.
It started here in Adelaide.
$100 million.
Yeah, it started here in Adelaide, and it was kicked off here with National Senior CEO and Head of Research, Professor John McCallum, one of the witnesses before the Royal Commission on day one. and John McCallum said that the home care wait list in Australia was a running sore and an abject failure. And that was because there are 128,630, I think was the figure, people waiting for the care that they needed in their own home. So let's just put aside residential care, just talk about people wanting the care they needed in their own home, and they're on a wait list. Now, successive governments, Labor and Liberal, had allowed this to happen. Successive governments, Labor and Liberal, had allowed the aged care system to fall into the quagmire that it is today. So I want to say right at the top that National Seniors is not a political organisation, but we are concerned about the politics of aged care, and we want it made an apolitical issue in the same way as we feel about mental health or suicide prevention. It should be a no-brainer that we take this out of the political arena and we make it part of the health system. So let's just go over a little bit of the background. So you have this Aged Care Royal Commission, which was announced in 2018, right? In October 2018, it was announced. They spend $100 million on it. We're there on day one, National Seniors, and we've also provided input after input after input. You know, what do you think of the recommendations? I can remember we spent all of Christmas going through what the Royal Commission had put forward and where our responses were. And we consult with people that work in aged care, with nurses, with all this, so that we can provide that input back in. At the end of this process, we had two aged care Royal Commissioners arguing over what should happen. Now, I'm not sure why they chose to have two Royal Commissioners. You might remember in the past when they had an investigation in, for example, we should think about this, atomic bombs on Aboriginal land. They didn't have two commissioners to argue about how they would deal with the cleanup of the Maralinga lands, for example, in South Australia, or various other matters where they've had a Royal Commission. But in this case, they had two. Interestingly enough, one of the Royal Commissioners died in the first year. The Royal Commission went so long that one person was diagnosed with a fatal illness and died, and that was Commissioner Tracy. And he was the one that wrote the most damning report of all, and that was called Neglect. And you could see his hand in there, and it was something that he wrote almost as a message from beyond the grave now, that you have to fix up this system. And when John McCallum said that the wait list was an abject failure and running sore, this interim report that came out at the end of, or halfway through that first year, because Richard Tracy died during that year, he said that the home care wait list was cruel and inhumane and had to be fixed. So let's just jump forward now, 18 months. The Royal Commission handed down its findings on March the 1st. Scott Morrison stood there with a copy of it, and he gave the waiting press 20 minutes notice that he was going to respond.
Right.
And then he said, we are going to give our full response by the end of May.
Right. So
we don't know the details of the full response, but we assume that the full response was outlined in the May budget, because there were various measures in the May budget that actually say they are addressing some of those issues, like the home care wait list. And you would have seen in that little video up the front, we talked about the number of packages that have been allocated for the home care wait list. And we were talking about two separate issues here, but they are interrelated: home care and residential care. So let's just think about doing some numbers. And if you've got pen and paper there at the moment, think about these. Last budget, which was in October, because we didn't have a May budget last year because of COVID, the minister announced that there would be 30,000 extra home care packages. Okay, so think of that number. Then he announced this time that there would be 80,000 extra home care packages, 40 in this coming year and 40 in the next year. If you add those two numbers up, it comes to 110,000.
Well, that's a win, isn't it?
That's a big win. The next thing is, how do we find the workers? How do we actually make this happen? And the reason why people want these home care packages is because they don't want to go into care. When we survey our members, needless to say, they're anxious about going into care. But we cannot live in a world where we say every single person is going to be looked after in their home. They'll die in their sleep, and life will be a dream. You know, I mean, it won't happen that way. There will still be people required to go into care. So you've got two things running simultaneously: the need to improve home care, the need to improve residential care. The budget has given recommendations to improve aged care, and we'll get to those a little bit later. But we know that we've had a big step forward in reducing the home care wait list. How we will actually provide the workers and the quality of care in home is a separate issue. But then you've got the 200 or so thousand people that are in residential care. They need better food, better care, better trained workers. All of those things have to happen. And the Royal Commission recommended that they have 4 hours of care a day.
Right.
And in fact, at the moment, they get a little over 3 hours of care a day. And that's on average. So we're talking about a 25% improvement recommended by the Royal Commission. The government, in its response, said they would go to 200 minutes of care. Not 240, which is 4 hours, but 200 minutes. And we still don't know what's going to happen with the next stage. They said they would give $10 a day extra to every resident, which is actually, when you think about it, a big improvement, because roughly the government spends around $100 a day. So that's a 10% increase in the funding for aged care. The Labor Party last weekend came out and said, oh yes, but that'll go straight into the pockets of the providers. How do we know what will happen with it? The minister came out and said, we are going to do audits. We're going to make sure the money goes to care. So there's a bit of a political tussle happening at the moment. But what I want people to understand is that when I took this job on 5 years ago, aged care was in a very poor state. We've had a Royal Commission. We've had a lot of money go into it, $17.7 billion in this budget. It's not enough to fix the problem, but it's enough to actually improve the situation and improve it markedly. But we have to continue the push. Yes. And that means that every single person that's watching today who's had an interest in this, I want you to write to your local member. I want you to write to your local federal member and say, look, I know you've given $17.7 billion in this budget, but I want to make sure that you restore faith in the system. I don't believe what you've done is enough to fix the system. It's a good first step. We're watching you. We want it improved, or whatever.
Now, Ian, I asked the poll in the pre-session just now, just going, are you happy with the recent federal government announcements? Put any comments in the chat room. 87% of people said no. They're not happy with it. But there was actually a really good comment in there from Carmel going, how can you say yes or no when we're confused about what it actually means? Craig, from your perspective, what's your viewpoint of what's just happened recently? It's a great first step. I agree with Ian, but there's just so much more that needs to be done around it to give us the confidence.
Yeah, so mandating the 200 minutes is great. It's a good start, but I can guarantee that the industry will lobby that they can't deliver on it, and it has to be delayed. When Rebecca Sharkey tried to bring in a quality of care bill back in 2018 with some ratios in there, they claimed they didn't have the administration systems to track that, which is ridiculous. I've been in business a long time. I call that payroll. Of course, they've got the systems. So, I'm happy to see, much like Ian, I'm happy to see the big jump in funding, and it's a good start because there's nothing can be done without that. But the next step really is going to be about how the government keeps the pressure on the industry to make sure they deliver on that. And the audit system also got a huge increase in funding, which is good. Again, so long as that money is going to quality audits and not hiring more bureaucrats. The audits that are done at the moment really go into the absence of negative instances. So they're looking for things like injuries and unnecessary weight loss. It's a little bit like saying, we've rated this. So in fact, the government does this. They have a rating system. They say we give it a full 4-star rating out of 4. But that just means that the home has not done anything bad, like really bad. It's kind of like going into a restaurant and giving it 2 hats and saying it's one of the best restaurants because they haven't failed their health quality standards. There's no cockroaches in the kitchen. The budget's a start, but I think it's going to be a long road for us before we actually see significant increases in quality.
And Ian, we've had that many inquiries over the past 20 years around aged care. Like, how optimistic are you that this money's going to be well spent, but we're actually going to be able to move forward? And your mic's off, Ian.
I always say to people that it's better to be optimistic than pessimistic, because you can actually almost by a movement of people. I mean, if we all believe that things are going to stay the way they are, then I think the politicians and the providers and other people sort of pick up on that. Oh, well, they all think it's pretty awful, let's leave it that way. I do think we do need to be optimistic, and I think the fact that we've had this change, and now they talk about it as being a once-in-a-generation change. Well, that means that they lost a whole generation for 25 years, and they didn't do the right thing by then.
That's a very interesting point, Ian.
I mean, so we've now got a once-in-a-generation chance to improve it for the next generation. And I always think of the words of Marx, Groucho Marx. He said, why should we care about future generations? After all, what have they done for us? Now, in a very sad way, what we've done over the last 25 years of the previous Aged Care Act is neglected those people that have been in that care, and they are still in that care situation, and we have to change it. So we have to be optimistic, but we also have to keep the pressure on. And that's why I say, join an organisation like National Seniors, sign up for a campaign, create some political push to keep this change happening. Don't see this as, we've ticked and flicked the Royal Commission, we've fixed that problem, let's move on, nothing more to see here. I agree exactly with what Craig has said. You have to keep the pressure on. If we're going to have a star rating system, which is what the Royal Commission suggested, that star rating system has to be trusted. And I go back to that fundamental statement that Scott Morrison made when he announced the Royal Commission. I am going to restore faith in the aged care system. That's what he promised.
Yep.
So this is where the nation has to keep him to his promise. Right?
What's the biggest challenge that we face in implementing the changes right now? Like, is it governments around, where the money's being spent properly? Like, what do you see as the biggest challenge to make this a success?
Well, I think you've got to make sure that inside the government itself that there is the political will to change it, and also inside the Labor Party itself as well, because even though I said I don't want this to be political, there is a political element to it. And I think that what is a good sign, and this is why I'll go back to being optimistic again, is that prior to the end of last year, just before the end of last year, there was a reshuffle. Now, in that reshuffle, they made Richard Colbeck, who was the third aged care minister they'd had in about 3 years, they made him the Minister for Aged Care Services, and then they made Greg Hunt the Minister for Aged Care, and he is the Health Minister. Now, because Greg Hunt also has had to deal with COVID, and obviously, there's been a lot happening there, you might say, well, look, how can he devote his attention to this issue? But a minister is, in fact, a good minister if they push the department to bring about the change, because the department is actually the ones that run the show. So if he says, I want 1,500 audits done so I can see where the money's going, and he drives that change, and he wants to know where the money's going, that's a good sign. I understand that he's ordered 500 audits into home care, and he wants to work out how much of those home care packages are being chewed up in fees. And we go back to Rebecca Sharkey that we just heard mention of before. She is trying to, in the old sense, keep the what's honest by actually wanting to get a handle on those fees. And then I think that the optimism is there because we're seeing these audits being conducted. So therefore, we're going to have a better idea. And what I've said publicly on many occasions is that this is not just a situation about the money, it's about following the money. Where does the money go? And that's why I'm very pleased to be talking with Care 360 today, because we talked to someone who I understand has had a long track record in business. You know, when you said before, you know, it's called payroll, you know, well, I mean, I think it's brilliant. I'm a journalist, you're a businessman. I'm an advocate, you're a businessman. Business people know it's not about the money, it's how you spend the money. It's the value for money. So what we should be pushing for is where does the money actually go? How much of it goes in care? And how can I see that if I'm a person receiving a home care package or in residential care? Because one thing we've forgotten, and we haven't actually mentioned this at all, is that many people, in fact, all people, pay for this. They keep talking about this as about the taxpayers. If you're a taxpayer, you pay for it, right? If you are in an aged care home and you're a pensioner, have a guess how much of your pension goes in care. Do you know the figure?
I don't.
It's 85%.
Wow.
Right? So a pensioner hands over 85% of their pension when they're in care. They don't have much left, you know. There was even a suggestion that maybe it should be 87% or something, so that they get that little bit of extra care going into care. And maybe that isn't an option. If you are a self-funded retiree and you get a home care package and the package is worth about $50,000, have a guess how much you put in as well.
Not sure.
11,000.
Right. Wow.
So if you're getting a home care package as a self-funded person, you're only getting 40,000 or 39,000 from the government. You're putting in over 11,000 or whatever the figures are. But I mean, this is where, you know, we'll come back to a person who's got knowledge of business. I mean, this is why we've got to have people with a really good knowledge of business there, because you've got a lot of people saying, oh, we should get rid of all those for-profit people and we should only have not-for-profits in there. Well, the not-for-profits were the subject of the Four Corners program. The not-for-profits had pictures of the crucifix up there, and yet they were crucifying people inside those homes by not giving them a drink of water. I mean, when Christ was on the cross, he wanted a drink of water. There was a blind lady in the Four Corners program saying she sat there and couldn't get a drink of water. I mean, it was so obvious that it's not who runs the home. It's actually if someone is making sure that the person's getting the care. And that's why we need really good people watching over the providers to make sure that that money gets spent properly. We need value for money for the taxpayer. We need value for money for the care recipient, because the taxpayer and the care recipient are one and the same. And at some point, you will need that care. And this is like saying, why should we care about aged care? That's like saying, why should we care about the hospital system? Yeah,
it's needed. Now, Craig, from a Care 360 perspective, is anything going to change with the handing down of the budget, etc., from your business's perspective? And what can people do stuff now before everything starts kicking in?
Yeah, look, we're constantly changing and improving the quality measures, so nothing's actually going to change in terms of our focus. And you were talking again about the audits and the quality of care, and I've been watching some of the chat room conversations about some of the things that people really care about in the detail around quality of care. Where's this money being spent? One of the things that the government used to do, and actually bizarrely they stopped back in the end of 2019, was a consumer experience review. In other words, a survey of actual residents in these homes, and if for reasons of cognitive issues the resident couldn't do it, then the family was allowed to participate. So we use all of that information still. So we've got things in there, for example, on the quality of food, which is one of the survey questions. The government has that data, and you can actually find it on the government's database, but all you see is what the score was for that home. Yes. Okay, it was 6.5 out of 10. Well, that means nothing to you because you can't compare it to everything else. So literally all we did is said, okay, it's not that difficult with, if you've got the right data technicians in the background to take all of that survey data, put it into one comparison tool and say, hey, is 6.2 good or bad? Right? When it comes to food, that's actually pretty good. We just do the old system from school days and say, well, if the whole class got a really bad score, then and you got a half decent score, you got an A. Yeah. If everyone got a good score and you got a bad score, you got a C. Right? We just use an A, B, C, D, E scale based on where all the homes sit against each other, but we allow direct comparison on food. I saw one of the ladies before asking about abuse, safety is one of the measures, independence, mental wellness, physical activity. And allow comparison. We've got, I think there's about 80% of the homes were actually surveyed before they closed that system down. So you can compare not just home by home. Then what we do is we roll that up and we go, what about the provider? If this provider has 20 homes and I'm about to put my mum into one of them, and much like you, Luke, unfortunately that's inevitable for me at this point, for my parents and in-laws. I'm not going to, just because a home got a good rating, but actually all of the other homes by the same operator got a bad rating. I'm not putting them in with that brand. I want a brand that's consistently had a good rating. So your question about are we changing, other than continuously trying to find new quality data? No, we're going to keep comparing home against home, operator against operator. Be great if these budget releases actually have an impact on the quality of care.
Yeah. Do you think they will?
Right now, we're still doing it.
Do you think that it will? Do you think the aged care homes will improve their quality of standards because of this?
I think the combination of the budget, I never want to be ungrateful, right? This is a significant increase in budget.
Yes.
After, as Ian said at the start, after Liberal Labor for 15, 20 years under funding it, they're putting a little bit back in. I suspect after putting all those home care places back in, we'll start to eliminate the wait list, but like most wait lists, there's then the second wait list, the people who didn't go on the wait list because there was a wait list.
Yeah.
On the aged care homes themselves, permanent residential aged care, I think it's going to be several years before we see significant improvement across all the homes.
Okay.
But there are some really good operators out there and some very, very compassionate nursing staff in them who really care. I think you'll see that top end of the market, not expense-wise, top end of quality. I think that will move first and they'll drag the others up.
Could I just say quickly that what you talked about there in terms of what people are thinking and what they are feeling about their experience in aged care, when you mentioned that survey that the government had the data from, the Royal Commission actually did a survey just before it handed down its report late last year, and it was done by Julie Ratcliffe from Flinders University, and she is an extraordinary academic who's doing wonderful work by looking at what people are saying, and exactly what you said, Craig. And this is what she found. Now, listen to these figures. Less than 1 in 4, 24% of Australians in residential care, felt that their needs of care are always met. And just 1 in 5 in home care felt their needs were always met. Now, that data was given to the Royal Commission. And her organisation down there at Flinders University is called the Caring Futures Institute. So we know we've got plenty of data. The thing about these inquiry after inquiry after inquiry and $104 million being spent on a Royal Commission is we know exactly what the problem is. And this is why I think we've got to go back to some very basic philosophical statements now. What is the problem? We know what the problem is. What's the cost of doing nothing? Which is what we've been doing, and we've seen that people have been dying. What's the cost of doing something? Well, it's going to be a lot more than $17.7 billion in one budget. And then how do you sell it to people that they should spend that money? You know, how do you actually, well, there's no question that when that these governments are weak, and they are, and I hate to say it, but they are gutless because they won't take up the challenge of investing more than what they have done now because they think they can get away with it. But if you actually have a look at what our members tell us, they say they're willing to pay more for care. They all say that. But in the Royal Commission, the recommendations that were neglected and turned down were that anyone should pay any more for care. Now, I'd like Craig's take on that, because this is where you have that incredible situation where the politics and the reality meet. And that is that if you want to increase the quality of care, you've got to pay more. And then both Labor and Liberal will probably say, oh, we don't want to go there because that'll mean increasing taxes. If we increase taxes, we'll be called the government that increased taxes, and therefore we'll get thrown out at the next election. And my suspicion is the only reason that we've managed to get across the line with this increased money is because of COVID and the strange world where interest rates have fallen down to next to nothing. So it was almost a great confluence of events that allowed the 17.7 to be spent. So I think what we have to do as individuals is tell our politicians, I want you to spend more on aged care. I want you to fix the problem. And I'll tell you something now, that this has been a figure that just keeps popping up over and over and over again. Australia spends roughly half what the OECD average is on aged care.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Ian. Like, how do we actually stack up versus other?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We spend that now, and the other thing is, if you look around the world, we have the third highest rate of institutional care in the world. So not only do we spend roughly half what the other countries are spending in the OECD, we have a more institutionalised care system and a less home-based care system. So you can see that Australians, we've got the Olympics coming up. We want to be the number one in the Olympics, don't we? We want to win gold. We want to be the best country in the world when it comes to sport. We want to win the Ashes. We want to win the Rugby World Cup. We want to win the Melbourne Cup. We want to win everything. We always back winners. When it comes to aged care, we go, oh, well, guess what? We're the third, we'd get a bronze medal in the institutionalised aged care Olympics because we would be the third most institutionalised aged care. We would we wouldn't even make the finals of the top 10 in terms of what we spend on aged care. So we have to tell the government, spend what it takes to fix the system. But that's when I come back to Craig again. How do we make sure that when we give that money over, that we get value for money? And that's why we need people like Craig, business people, to do the books and say, all right, you got given $100 a day to look after my mum.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Where did that $100 go? I want to see where that $100 been. Where? I mean, if you had a painter come round to your house and he says, it's going to cost you $10,000 to paint the house, you're going to say, well, how many hours is that? How much sandpaper are you going to use? How much paint are you going to use? How many coats of paint are you going to use? Are you going to prepare it properly? I mean, that's what we do when we do an audit of an individual. Or, you go to a restaurant and say, well, I want to see how much did the soup cost? How much did the main course cost? You know what? I mean, and yet with aged care, we say, there's the money, go ahead and spend it. And that's been the problem. So there's two things going on. We spend half what the rest of the world spends on aged care, roughly, and then we don't know where the money goes. So it's almost like a double whammy, and we've got to fix both of those things. And that's why I get back to people like Craig. We need people like Craig who have got a business sense and a business nous going in there and saying, I want to look at the books. Yeah, I want to see, and that's what he's doing. He's saying, what they should be doing is publishing their annual reports, and Craig should be able to look at the annual report and say, you tell me how much you spent on care last year in that particular home.
Call it BS on it, eh?
Sorry?
Well, and that's exactly right. Like, it's all about transparency. I was listening to one of the pieces of legislation from the budget where it was actually entered just about an hour or so ago, and the health minister came on and said, we're all about transparency in aged care. And it's BS. It's complete rubbish because we also operate, by the way, in Canada. Care 360 operates in Canada. And now in Canada, we can tell you what is spent per resident on food each day. We can tell you how many nurses, registered nurses, enrolled nurses, and what they call PCAs, personal care assistants, unqualified nurses, are spent on each patient each day. Allied health, how many hours per person per day? And this is a system that actually spends less of its GDP, as Ian said, less of its GDP less of its national product on aged care than what we do. We're supposed to be the best health system in the world. That's our brand. And yet we spend more and we don't know where it goes. You know, I've been in investments for 30 years. That's why I was the global chief investment officer at Macquarie. You were not allowed to do anything. We would never invest 1 cent of someone else's money, which is what this is, without knowing exactly what that was going to be invested in. How is it that the Canadian system is doing this and we can't? And this is where it gets really embarrassing. We're now setting up in Florida. We've got data in Florida that not just gives the average amount of food spent per home per day, it gives the actual amount of food spent on the 26th of May 2021 and the 25th and the 24th by home. It's 2.5 million lines of data across the whole of America. Now, America is supposed to have a terrible health system. That's their brand. How did that happen? They get a higher number of hours of nursing than us by a factor of 1.5, right? And this is all, again, to Ian's point, this was all announced in the Royal Commission. There's some great work done by the University of Wollongong, where they did some comparisons and they showed if we were in the American system, how would we look? How would our star ratings be?
Yeah, and I think they found. I think they've, Craig. I think they found that if we had a star rating system the same as the American one, that we wouldn't have any homes that would get above 3-star. That would be the best, wasn't it?
There was a couple that got a 4, none got a 5, and 66% of them failed.
What?
Yeah, and that was on the most generous measure.
Now, Craig, have you been, this is the question I would like to ask, is, I mean, what you're saying is putting a business mind across this. I mean, you said you feel confident about some of the homes, and this is why I think our National Seniors members and others watching this today would love to know. When you look at these, you're drilling into them with your Care 360, you must be finding some that are doing well. Is it possible to run a home today with the required number of staff that will give you the care that Julie Ratcliffe was talking about, where their needs are met virtually all of the time, and they get good food, and they get looked after, and they can get by on the government funding that they've got at the moment? Because if we knew that, then we would say this is not about money, this is about how the money's spent. And I want to know whether you've come across a home where they are doing that with the money allocated and they're actually providing care that gets them a 3-star, for example.
We find plenty of homes, and I won't go into brands because I don't really find it necessary.
No, I don't want to know the names. I just want to know if it's actually possible, because
it is very possible.
Because then you could go back to government with that data that you've got and actually put that under Greg Hunt's nose and say, look, Minister, we found 15% of the homes that are out there at the moment meet 3-star standard given the funding that they've got at the moment. And the reason they do it is because they actually spend the money on care. And this is where you should be targeting your audits and say, and I'm telling you this as the former global head of Macquarie Bank or whatever, so that he might sit there and say, right, I better listen to what this guy's saying.
Well, I literally did that. And I sat at Richard Colbeck's desk and showed him the data, showed him the comparisons, and the feedback was that they need to maintain relationships with the industry and the consumers and be balanced, and they didn't want to compare.
Wow.
That was close to what I said. It wasn't quite wow. It may have had some more letters, but yes, it was. And yet again, when we deal with Canada, they have a provincial, state-based system there, not national. But when we're dealing with British Columbia, they opened their arms up to us, right? We had a very similar organisation to National Seniors that we've worked with over there called the Senior Advocates Office, and they introduced us to government, and government was thrilled to see us there. It's interesting looking at the system in America. In Canada, the reason they spend less money overall is they have rather than everyone gets access to publicly funded. Everyone has the right to access to publicly funded, but they just don't have enough beds. And I think it's an intentional thing. They under supply the number of licenses, but it means that the quality of the ones that they have are very good.
Yep.
Those who are socially and financially disadvantaged definitely have access because there's a hospital-based aged care system as well. Those with the financial means basically just go to private homes that are not government funded, right? So we rate those as well, and you can actually see where the quality differences are across that spectrum. But everyone pays the same proportion of their post-tax income.
Right.
Different system. They don't have compulsory super and so on, but it works out on far more of a user pays, the wealthy pay more basis. And look, to Ian's point, I'm perfectly happy to fund my own aged care. I don't want someone else to fund it if it means that they're going to get terrible care.
That's a few people have said that in the chat room as well. A few people have actually said that in the chat room as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell you what, the government better be staying close to you, Craig, because you're going to be able to track how they go, wouldn't you, in the coming years?
Not going to, will be.
Yeah.
And particularly once we've got all the Florida data built up as well, you'd hate to see Australia fall behind Florida. Like, that just doesn't feel like a great benchmark. But that's where I think we're starting behind.
Now we're getting closer to the hour. We've had a really good discussion today so far, and I want to get into questions. So can people start putting those questions? If you've already asked some before, can you just resubmit that question for me, just so it's at the top of my screen? We'll be getting people to ask questions very soon. Now, let's just tackle a couple more things. Craig, if we've got people watching today who are contemplating about aged care, but they don't know where to start, what's the first step for them? Because it is a daunting task. It can be daunting if you don't know where to start.
Yeah.
What's your take for those people that are interested in aged care at the moment?
Let's put people into two camps. One is they're in the urgent camp, and the other is that they're planning ahead. If you're in the urgent camp, in other words, you've got family or yourself or your spouse or a friend who needs care and they need it immediately, the number one thing is to start looking through the homes that are available to you. We hear far too many people, they think they've only got one option. Now, if you live in any of the major cities or any of the rural cities around Australia, you've always got several options. The availability is there. The one option answer typically comes about because you go to say a placement agent or one of the advertising sites and you only see one option show up. I can guarantee you, everyone who's called through to our service line and where they haven't been able to find other options have been given at least 3 immediately available options with the right level of quality and what they're looking for. And unless you live somewhere very, very remote, it's very difficult if you're outside off the coastline in Australia, and that's something they're addressing in the budget. But it's always going to be tough. But that's the number one. Make sure you're really considering your choices so that you know you're finding the right home. If you're planning ahead and you've got a little bit more time, then take the time to understand what you can afford. There's a deep level of misunderstanding about fees in aged care. I totally understand it. It could not be more complicated if you tried.
Yep.
Bizarrely, one of the formulas in one of the fees uses a year of 364 days instead of 365. What genius came up with that one? There's 6 different levels of fees. We run a very basic service that just says, look, tell us about what it's like 6 or 7 questions, and we simply work that one backwards to say, okay, on the pricing system that the aged care homes use, the refundable accommodation deposit, the RAD, this is what you can afford.
Yeah.
This is the range. Now, you might not want to spend all of that. You might want to spend more, but that's the range. Just to try and cut through all these different levels of fees. So if you've got the time, plan ahead and think about what it's going to cost.
I just put it up. Well, it's been up there for a while. If you click on the offers button right down the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to get access to that free aged care fee estimation. So I'd click on that now if you can, or look at it in your own time. And conscious, I want to get to questions, but why National Seniors? Why should people be a part of National Seniors?
Well, I suppose it's like being part of a union. I often say to people, there is no organisation that's there to fight for your rights or whatever if you stop working. You know, I mean, and it's actually a way of having a voice. And in places like Canada and America and others, there are older people's organisations that do go into bat for older people. And I suppose what I'm saying is that's the main thing we hear from our members is that they want to be part of a group, and they can feed us information. I mean, in the coming election, for example, we'll be consulting with members. We'll be having various things on our website where people can send in their concerns. And then when you go and sit down with a politician, you can say to them, look, I can give you what people are saying. And I'll give you just a very quick example. We polled our members recently and said, and we know, and this, look, I know there's a group that don't own their own homes, but 80% of 80-year-olds own their own homes. Now, if you had a loan scheme where you could borrow against your home to pay for the care in your home or better aged care through a scheme like that, you could do it. With interest rates now being so low, we're saying that the pension loan scheme could be used as a way of paying for better care. As Craig said, a lot of people will pay for better care, but at the moment the pension loan scheme is 4.5%, and we're hearing from people that that's too much. These are sort of examples of where we can walk into a minister's office and say, look, we've polled people, we've spoken to them, this is what they're saying. The sort of things that we're hearing on the chat line there today.
Yeah, love it.
I mean, these are the things we can feed back. So why National Seniors? It gives you an opportunity. You can't necessarily get into the room with Minister Hunt or Minister Colbeck, but we can. And just as Craig said, we've got to keep telling them this is what people want. This is what people are saying, because politicians respond to numbers of people. Yeah. So please consider joining. Look, a 3-year membership is $99, and I think that works out at about 8 cents a day, which
it's $33 a year, which is really nothing.
So and you also get access to things like Care 360.
You've answered one of the questions there from Leslie, like how can we speak for ourselves? How can we get a seat at the tables? We need a voice, our voice. And I think that's where National Seniors really comes in. All right, let's get to some questions. This is from Jerry. Any comments about pressure to use in-due card for aged pensioners?
Yeah, so this is the new proposal that there's one particular card, effectively like the old, it was the Howard government's Australia card approach to track everything. There'll be one benefit from that. I think I don't like the system. I think it's got all sorts of social issues, but the only benefit would be that if it was used for at-home care, for example, then people would be able to manage their own at-home care packages, and there'd be a tracking system for it. You'd be able to actually note it. When we were talking to Rebecca Sharkey a couple of years ago, she gave an example of one of her constituents in the hills of Adelaide that asked the home care provider to pick up a cup of coffee from Bridgewater Mill, just around the corner. And the charge came through on their bill from their home care package provider for $104.80, which was a couple of admin charges that go to every payment plus the time to pick up the coffee, and the $4.80 was the coffee itself.
Wow.
Now, look, I can just see a couple of questions there about Mary wants to know how many members the National Seniors have. We've got a situation where we've got about 100,000 paid up members, and they join the organisation. We've also got what we would call at least that many supporters. I'm going to give you an example. That little video we played at the front there, 15,000 people had viewed that. They wouldn't all be members, but we've got supporters. We've got people that join up to our campaigns. If you go to our website, you can see the various campaigns that we've got. And some campaign supporters become members. It's a bit like a football club. You know, you barrack for Collingwood or Port Adelaide or the Gold Coast, whatever's, and then some people go and become a member because they feel that committed to it. Others just support the team. So, and that's, I suppose, the most important thing to remember is that when you look at the number of older Australians in this country, we've got 5.8 million baby boomers.
Yeah.
It's a very big group of Australians. We've got 8 million people over the age of 50 in Australia. Every second voter is over 50. And that's why I keep saying to the politicians, you have to fix this. This is not just a question of saying, we want to restore faith in the aged care system because it's an option. There is no option. And I think they have to be made aware that Australians have this as a priority. There are 360,000 people that work in aged care, so they've all got an interest in it.
Of course.
Ken Wyatt said there will be a need for at least twice that number of people to work in aged care in the next 25, 30 years. So this is something that is not going to be, I mean, as that age boom or aging boom of people comes through, it's just going to get more and more demand. So governments can't say, look, we've done the Royal Commission, we've got 148 recommendations, we've agreed to those, we've fixed it, well, let's move on. This is not like that. This is an issue that will be with us, until we get it right. And so, getting back to that point, why care? Because you've got a vested interest in it. As Paul Keating would say, if you want to back a horse, always back a horse of self-interest. There's an interest for all of us to get this right, not just because we're okay now. I mean, in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, I could have a stroke tomorrow and be in aged care. That's why we've got to think about it.
A question from Michael here. How do we get access to Care 360? Obviously, your website. Is there a telephone number as well, Craig? And is there any costs?
For National Seniors members, no. There's not. It's just part of the relationship we have with them. We do the same thing in other places too. The contact details are on the website, simply care360.com.au. And if you want to use the search services, that you can do it all online, or if you like some people find, if they want to speak to someone, then we've got the care navigators there to help as well.
Here we go. Here's another question from Miriam Martin. Does your panel think that the regulators is fit for purpose? The RC didn't think so and recommended it was disbanded, yet they have given them more dollars.
They're going to write a new Aged Care Act, and I would wait to see that and how that new act will be set up. I do think we've got to keep pushing for change and keeping the pressure on, so that they can't just, it cannot be business as usual. It's just not acceptable. So even though they didn't say we're going to shut the old system down and start a new one, which is what the recommendation of Mr. Pagoni was, if they choose to keep it within the department, effectively what they're doing, they're going to have to make sure that they get it right. And I think there's a momentum there within the community, and the fact that we've got hundreds of people clicking on this morning that are interested in this, and we've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in aged care, working in aged care. This is a big issue that won't go away. The Royal Commission is just the beginning. The budget is just the beginning. This is not the end of the story.
Yeah, no, it totally isn't, and I'm personally so glad that there's two people on this call today, on this webinar, who are very passionate to make sure that we don't let the government slip on this. So before we finish off today, very interested from a Care 360 and also National Seniors perspective, if there's any other topics that you want us to cover in potential future ones as well. So if you can just put that in the chat room, it doesn't have to be around the federal budget, it could be around other topic areas that interest you. But if you can put that into the chat room now, we'll take that into consideration for future potential offerings. Now, we're conscious of time because we're coming up to the 12 o'clock mark. Gents, one last comment from each of you around, your hopes, your dreams, I suppose. We've spoken a lot about, the potential challenges, but, let's finish off on a positive as well today. So over to you, Craig, first.
Selfishly, I hope that by the time I'm putting my parents into care in the next, as Ian said, it could be tomorrow, it could be the next few months, that things start to improve. And I genuinely think that we, if we're not at bottom, then we're near bottom. This was there's a lot to be done. So we've talked about what needs to be done, but this was a good start on both the home care packages in the front and the aged care front. With a lot more transparency, then market forces can kick in as well, like they do, like it happens in other countries. If you can actually see what's spent on food and how many nurse hours do you get, I can actually see the quality of care that I'm getting and make my own decision. then that's when we'll really start to see some improvements. Interesting as an endpoint, hearing Ian talk before about sport and the way that we approach sport in Australia, and we want to see as many gold medals in the Olympics and so on. Does anyone know who the Minister for Sport is federally?
Yeah, it's actually the same man. It's the Minister for Aged Services.
Aged Care Services, Richard Colbeck. So if he applied the same passion and standards there as he does in sport, then we might start to see some great improvement.
So good. And Ian, from your perspective, to finish off today?
Well, look, I also think that this has been I would say this has been a great first step. I think we should do this more often, because I think it's possible in the modern world to be able to get people's thoughts and ideas. And if people out there, I know a lot of people want to raise points. For example, we've got Mo saying not-for-profits are just as guilty, if not more, than for-profits because they build their own empires. We've had someone else talking about dehydration being a major problem in homes. That was the argument that I put forward about that poor lady in the not-for-profit home who couldn't get a drink of water because she was blind, and they placed the glass out of reach. I mean, these are the sort of things that we heard. But we should, in conclusion, be positive, because we have seen a change. We've seen a change of minister. We've seen the minister become in the inner cabinet now. I do believe that Greg Hunt, because he came from, almost a similar background to you, Craig. I think he went to America and he studied there, and he was working for one of the big financial institutions. I think, if you do your background on him, he's someone who probably will understand what you're saying, Craig. And I'm wondering whether you had that meeting with Minister Colbeck. Do you think you should have that meeting with Minister Hunt? And
it's actually trying to be set up right now. They're literally trying to do it in this setting, but I haven't heard back yet.
If I can do anything for you, I will send him a little note saying I've just been on a webinar today, and I think you should talk to the people that are involved.
Let's bring him on the webinar.
Yeah, well, bring him on the webinar. Exactly. What I'm saying is that people have power, and they often feel powerless. People that live in aged care homes probably feel that they're powerless, but they haven't. They've got power, and we've got to give them that voice. We've got to make sure that they have their rights as individuals looked after. And I think we've all got to do our own bit. You're pushing for a meeting with Greg Hunt. I'll help you get that. I think everybody that's on the call today should actually write a letter to their federal MP. And so, because when they start getting flooded with these things, they start saying, we can't ignore this. So if you've gone to the trouble today to log on, and you've given up your time today, go and buy a stamp, put it on an envelope, write it off to Greg Hunt or Richard Colbeck or the Prime Minister. You take your pick, and even send one to the Labor Party saying, look, I'm very concerned about the fact that we've got to improve aged care. You promised to fix the system. We're going to keep you to hold that promise. I think it is a combination of political pressure, positivity, and people power.
That's right. And today is a very good first start for everyone watching today to be able to galvanise together and can continuously stay on the case of everyone out there. And let's make this change possible. Craig, Ian, thank you so much for adding your viewpoints today and your expertise in this area, hopefully providing a little bit of clarity around what has actually just occurred, but what needs to still occur in it. Big shout out to Care 360 and National Seniors Australia for putting this on today. And if everyone can please give a wave of gratitude into the chat room right now, we will relook at this chat log. We'll pull out some of that data from the chat log itself. And we do promise you to share this replay link. If you want to share it around, just wait for the communication from either National Seniors or Care 360, and we'll get this out far and wide as well. And just bring on Greg Hunt for the next one. I've got a spare screen here for him.
That's good. Look, I think in an age of democracy that we've got now, with the ability to do all these sort of connections, I think he would be interested in hearing what people are saying and bringing about change, because I think, if we go back to Paul Keating, the horse of self-interest, there is a big level of self-interest in getting it right. A politician that can get this right is going to be a politician that will be respected. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Labor, a Liberal, or they all do it. we're going to have to make sure that we get it right. And look, Luke, I want to say thank you to you for your organisation today and running this. I know we could have brought people in more, and we'll try and do it next time. I don't know. We're still learning this medium a bit, aren't we?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Ian and Craig, you can switch off your camera and mic now. I'm just going to close the room.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. And once again, we really do appreciate your time over the last sort of 60 minutes to hear about this. Please do check out the websites as well, whether it's National Seniors Australia or Care 360. I've been your host, Cookie, Luke Cook, and really do appreciate the discussion today. And like I said, let's keep on the agenda, and let's have more discussions like this and bring the community together so you all have a voice. Thank you, everyone, and we'll catch you next time. See you later. Bye.